The latest case, well, you've probably heard about this. Joe Rogan's controversial podcast on Spotify. The audio streaming company has laid out steps it will take to stop the spread of COVID-19 information on its platform. This comes after a mounting insurrection of users and musicians spoke out over its support for the podcast host and the growing controversy that it wasn't doing enough. Rogan also took to Instagram in an attempt to quell concerns on Sunday. Here's just part of what he said.
My pledge to you is that I will do my best to try to balance out these more controversial viewpoints with other people's perspectives so we can maybe find a better point of view.
All right, here to discuss what this all means for misinformation in the tech industry is no one better than our Quick Takes Alex Webb, who is in London for us. Alex, thanks so much for joining us. So some people are saying that Spotify is addressing this like any other tech platform would. What's your take? How do you think, based on sort of what they've said over the weekend, that their approach is going forward?
Well, basically, they've not really done anything beyond publish the guidelines they already had. They had guidelines which they made available to some of their, to their hosts, their podcast hosts, like Joe Rogan. They've just now published those for general consumption, everybody to know what they are. Ultimately, they are not beholden to the same sort of broadcasting rules that are the case in other parts of the world and for the rest of the broadcasting community. Like if you think about in the UK, we have a body called Ofcom that says that that all sort of controversial or untrue statements, it's not that they can't be expressed, but that you have to challenge them or point out that they have been proven untrue or that they are untrue. It seems Joe Rogan is going in that direction, but not all opinions have equal weight. They are not facts necessarily, and so it seems that being a bit stricter on those things is something that should be necessary.
And Alex, I mean, last week, I think everyone who was on Twitter would know that there were hashtags going around saying cancel Spotify because of all of this. I mean, is there ever a scenario in which Spotify would cancel or, take off someone like Joe Rogan from their platform? I mean, how integral is he to their growth entirely?
I mean, he is a very meaningful part. Let's look at some of the numbers. Spotify has still got less than 200 million paying subscribers. Joe Rogan in any given week attracts something like 11 million listeners. So, on that basis, he's perhaps 5% of the audience, and of course, it's really important in driving sign-ups. It's not just about people who listen every week. It's about getting new people to sign up to Spotify in order to listen to him. So, in a weird way, Spotify is big, but it is still not big enough that it can easily make the decision, we're just going to ditch Joe Rogan. Now, maybe there is an argument that they should, that it's a little bit spineless perhaps, that they're not making this sort of call, but they're not yet at the scale of Facebook. If you think about the middle of 2020, when a whole bunch of big brands boycotted Facebook, Unilever, Coca-Cola, plenty more besides, because of racist content that was being perpetuated on the platform, Facebook barely blinked. There was no meaningful impact to the earnings, and 6 months later, all those brands came back. Spotify isn't big enough to make that sort of call just yet.
But this is still going to be an issue for them. I mean, our Lucas Shaw points out there's 3 million podcasts on Spotify. I mean, how do they deal with this going forward? Especially, we're entering into an election year here in the U.S. I mean, more broadly, how are they going to deal with this?
I mean, it is a huge challenge, and it's not one that's easily resolved beyond just throwing a huge amount of headcount. This sort of thing is harder to find than is a posted hate speech, for instance, on Facebook. I'm not saying that what Joe Rogan was doing is hate speech, but problematic content of that nature. The challenge with anything of that sort of scale is vetting, and they can't do it that easily.
They can't do it that easily. And how do you see this potentially affecting their business then, Alex, going forward? I mean, Spotify's reporting earnings later this week, and I know part of their growth strategy has been podcasts. So if they don't deal with this, this could potentially hurt them, right? Or do you think this is just a blip?
Well, the thing that they're clearly trying to do is not necessarily the challenge they have is not necessarily stopping the issue, is they want to stop, one would imagine, other artists following suit. So Lucas, I think, also makes this point that Neil Young, for instance, isn't necessarily meaningful to Spotify. But if Taylor Swift were to follow suit, or maybe Coldplay, or big bands and artists, that would be a meaningful challenge, that you start to get a drip and losing talent and losing the songs that lots of people listen to. That's not happening just yet. Perhaps they're hopeful that this move has stopped that trend, but we'll soon know in the coming days.
Yeah, do you expect Daniel Ek to say anything additional on this, Alex?
I'm not unless he absolutely has to. He doesn't often make public statements anymore. It's not the days of 5-6 years ago. He didn't even really answer questions regularly on their earnings calls. So he's not someone who is readily accessible and out there making wide comments on every wrinkle that happens at the company.
And Alex, how do you see this affecting other companies? I mean, we think of Apple, Amazon, other companies that are also maybe watching this play out, who maybe have those own issues of their own. How do you think they are? How do you think they're seeing this and potentially learning from this situation?
Well, Apple in particular is incredibly risk averse when it comes to content, and it's hard to imagine they would be in this situation because they would never sign Joe Rogan. That if anything, criticism they've had is that when you think about Apple TV Plus, where they're making a lot of big budget TV shows, some of the content is a little bit harmless, some would even say banal, that they're not willing to take the big risks that lead to sometimes engaging content. So there's a balance there clearly to be found. That doesn't mean, of course, that we can guarantee that there are no podcasts available on its platform that don't include problematic content. But as with anything, it isn't, when we think about Facebook or Twitter and Instagram as well, it isn't necessarily that every single piece of content of this nature should be stopped. It's that when it reaches a certain scale and is really going viral, that there need to be the appropriate checks and balances in there to ensure that there is appropriate context, that knowing that this thing has been proven to be untrue, that thing is actually a lie. And so that is the issue here. It's the scale of Joe Rogan in particular.
Absolutely. And finally, Alex, I mean, who do you think loses out in this scenario? I mean, I'm just thinking of artists in particular who, some of them have spoken out about some of these streaming platforms. They're not getting paid very well on here. If you think of someone like Neil Young or Joni Mitchell, I mean, are these smaller artists who maybe choose to take the same position as these artists, are they the ones who lose out, or is there a bigger story here that might come?
Well, I think the people who lose out first and foremost are the people who decide not to get a vaccine because they're hearing, misinformation on Joe Rogan. Secondly, I think, Spotify delivers good money to the big names who are already on the platform. Otherwise, it tends to be building an audience so that when you go on tour, people come and see you because they've heard of you. A lot of artists don't make brilliant money on Spotify. It's really the top few percentage points worth that make a very good living. Otherwise, live music is where people mostly make their money. And if it means fewer people discover artists, that's when they start to have a problem.
That's true. All right, Alex, we have to leave it there. Really appreciate you being with us, though. Alex Webb with Quicktake in London for us, starting us off this morning. Alex, thanks so much.